one that we received pretty often on Twitter when asking about some different topics and players that we should compare. Alex, I'm going to have you go first here because I think you have the easier side in this debate. You're taking Travis Kelce, and I'm taking George Kittle. Let me hear your thoughts on Kelce and what you have to say against Kittle.
Yeah, Travis Kelce to me is far and away the number one tight end. It's honestly not close. I think Kittle's elite. I think there's other guys that are also elite. You think Zach Ertz as one of those guys, but to me, Kelce is in a tier of his own. Last season, he had 97 receptions for 1,229 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was the tight end one. He was actually fourth in the entire NFL in receiving yards. That's receivers and tight ends. So this is a guy who, you would have to spend super early draft capital to get him. Think late round 1, early round 2. But I don't know why you wouldn't just go ahead and draft Kelce, because he gives you the value of a wide receiver 1, but you get to play him in your tight end spot. And that's a huge advantage just because there aren't that many elite tight ends on the board. So you look at Kelce, here's the thing that separates him from Kittle, in my opinion. There is plenty of passing volume on the best passing offense in the league with the best quarterback in the league. In the Kansas City Chiefs. And you don't get that with George Kittle. With Kelce, Mahomes is going to go for around 300 yards as a baseline and a couple touchdowns every single game, where with the 49ers and George Kittle, you could actually see them, like we saw in the playoffs, shift towards the running game plan, and then Kittle gets totally phased out. And he's a good enough blocker to where they're fine just running the ball 30, 35 times a game if it's working. So, back to the Kelce side, he led all tight ends in snap count in 2019. The Chiefs were 5th in the NFL in passing yards a game, and that was with Mahomes missing 2.5 games. And Kelce had 8.5 targets a game in 2019. That's the most targets amongst tight ends. And from a consistency perspective, we see Kelce continue to bring it every single week. Kittle is a little bit more up and down. He does feel like he has a little bit higher of a ceiling, but he also has a lower floor. Kelce is so consistent. He had at least 6 receptions in 10 out of 16 games and at least 60 yards in 13 out of 16 games. And when we think about Kelce as well, let's just look at his fantasy finish for the last 4 seasons in PPR at the tight end position. He was tight end 1 this year. Last season, he was tight end 1, the season before this past one. Back in 2017, he was tight end 1, and then in 2016, he was tight end 1. So he's literally been the number 1 tight end for 4 straight seasons. You just look at history, there's no reason to believe that Kelce and this Chiefs offense and Patrick Mahomes are going to fall off anytime soon. He's the centerpiece of that offense. To me, I think there's maybe a case to make for Kittle if you want to try to get him around later, maybe from a value perspective. You could make that case, but to me, it's Kelce, and it's not even close.
Yeah, you put me in a tough spot here. I'm going to try to make my case. Now, I agree with you. Tight end 1, no question, is going to be Travis Kelce. Yeah, and you gave a lot of great reasons for that. If we look holistically at the game of football, I would say George Kittle is a better tight end just with his blocking ability.
Yeah.
Physically, he's bigger and he plays more physical than Kelce. We all remember that game that Kittle took over on a 4th and 2 against the Saints on the road and won that one for him. You also looked at age. Kittle's a little bit younger at 26 to Kelce's 30. And we had some names like Rob Gronkowski weigh in on this debate, Shannon Sharp. They all took Kittle over Kelce. Now, they're not talking fantasy there, but let's look at some of the situations that Kittle is in. He's got less weapons to compete with in San Francisco. Kittle's target share is a little bit higher at 28% to Kelce's 24%. So there's less, there's no Tyreek Hill that he needs to compete with. Kittle had 11 red zone receptions to Kelce's 7 last year, though in 2018, Kelce was number 1 with 17 red zone receptions. Kittle might have a little more upside in his volume, his yardage, and his scoring. I feel like Kelce's kind of at his peak, or he's already maxed out his volume on that offense. But this is a really tough case to make. The real case I think that needs to be made here is that Kittle and Kelce are essentially the same when it comes to fantasy, and you can wait to take Kittle almost a whole round later. Kelce has been going in drafts in early to mid second round. Will probably be mid to late second round by draft day with some of the new rookie names, but you can snag Kittle 4 to 8 picks later and essentially get the same fantasy production. Both tied for first at 15.9 fantasy points per game at the tight end position in PPR leagues. Both are top 5 at the position in terms of targets and receptions. Both are top 3 in terms of yards after the catch. Both had 5 touchdowns last year. And those target share numbers that I mentioned earlier, right? The 28% of the 24%, those are 1 and 2 at the tight end spot. So these are literally some of the best receiving tight ends of all time that we're watching here. It was awesome to see them both in the Super Bowl and get a bunch of hype at the end of last season. With 1,377 receiving yards in 2018, Kittle set the single season record for the tight end position. And that was just a year after Kelce did it in 2017 with 1,336 receiving yards. So, to me, they're about even. You can wait a little bit longer to get Kittle. Maybe if you're a fantasy player that wants to take a tight end early and Kelce gets sniped from you, by all means, wait a little bit and grab Kittle. But it's a tough one to make. I think holistically, I think most would take Kittle, but you cannot debate against Kelce as the tight end 1 for fantasy. You put me in a tough spot there. Hopefully that case was relatively decent. Alex, anything to say here on my Kittle case?
No, it was a good case, Steph. And like you said, we're splitting hairs here, right? Like Kelce and Kittle, if you end up with either of them as your tight end, you're really excited about it. Kittle had 85 catches for over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns last season. He was the tight end 2 and he missed 2 games. His upside is massive. And again, it's just the thing that sticks out to me, and this doesn't get reflected in the regular season stats, was the playoff run for San Francisco. We saw them really shift to that heavy running game, and Kittle again was a beast as a blocker. And I do agree with you that from an all-around perspective, receiving and blocking, I think I'd take Kittle from who do I want as my tight end as an NFL coach. But from a fantasy perspective, I just don't see that. Like Kittle in those playoff games, in the divisional round against Minnesota, 3 catches for 16 yards. The conference championship against Green Bay, 1 catch for 19 yards. The Super Bowl, 4 for 36. So he can fall off a little bit if the 49ers feature that dominant running game. But the upside is insane. He's probably one of the most, if not the most, athletic tight end in the NFL. And San Francisco still was 13th in pass yards a game in 2019, and that was while they were dominating a lot of games. I think, it's really hard to keep the status quo in the NFL year over year, so maybe if they're trailing a little bit more often in 2020 or if their games are a little bit more competitive, maybe that pass volume continues to increase. So I do think Kittle, from a value perspective, you can make a case for it, but man, I think we're both pretty much in agreement here that Kelce is going to be the tight end 1 in 2020. And to me, I'm a big fan of taking a tight end early in fantasy drafts. I think, if you take Kelce or Kittle, you're maybe sacrificing a wide receiver 1 or a top 12 guy. But on the back end, you can find a wide receiver 2 or a flex to plug in where you can feel good about 10 to 15 points a week. Last season, with our Deep Shots of the Week segment, we found guys like Russell Gage and Darius Slayton and Steven Sims on waivers that were getting us 20, 25 points a week for nothing. Where at the tight end spot, you might be picking up Foster Moreau and just hoping for a touchdown. So I love locking in an elite tight end, and it gives you that advantage week over week. And if you want to go with Kelce or Kittle, I think you're fine to take either in round 2 and feel pretty good about it.